The key turned silently in the lock, a practiced maneuver honed over years of late work nights. Tonight, however, I was an hour early. An unexpected cancellation had gifted me a rare Thursday evening at home, a prospect that filled me with quiet anticipation. I pushed the door open, expecting the familiar aroma of Laura's pasta sauce, a Thursday tradition. Instead, a different scent hung in the air, musky, unfamiliar, with a faint sweetness I couldn't place. A low murmur drifted from the bedroom, not quite talking, more like hushed whispers punctuated by soft sighs. I froze, my hand still on the doorknob. Laura was probably on a call with her sister, I reasoned, though her sister usually called earlier. I moved silently down the hallway, the plush carpet muffling my footsteps. The bedroom door was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of light escaping into the dim hallway. I pushed it open just enough to see. The scene before me felt surreal, like a poorly acted play. Laura was in our bed, the sheets tangled around her legs. But it wasn't just Laura. A man, a stranger, was with her. His back was to the door, but the shock of the moment seared every detail into my mind. Laura's hand intertwined with his, the rhythmic rise and fall of their shared breath, the discarded clothes scattered on the floor like fallen leaves. A wave of nausea washed over me, followed by a cold, sharp anger that settled deep in my chest. My first instinct was to shout, to rage, to tear them apart. But something else took over, a strange detachment, a clinical curiosity. I reached into my pocket, my fingers finding the familiar smooth surface of my phone. I opened the camera app, my thumb hovering over the record button. My hand was steady as I pushed the door open further, the soft click of the latch barely audible above the sounds from the bed. Laura gasped, her eyes widening in horror as she saw me standing there. The man beside her jolted upright, his face a mask of panic and guilt. "Elliot," Laura stammered, her voice barely a whisper. The man scrambled to pull the sheets up to his chest, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape route. I simply stood there, my phone held steadily in my hand, the red recording light blinking silently. "Ryan, isn't it?" I said, my voice calm, almost conversational, in stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside me. I had seen the name pop up on Laura's phone a few times, dismissed it as a colleague. Now, the pieces clicked into place with brutal clarity. Ryan, a lanky man with tousled brown hair, looked like a deer caught in headlights. He didn't answer, his gaze fixed on the phone in my hand. "Get out," I said, my voice low but with an edge of steel that made Ryan flinch. "Get out of my house. Now." Ryan didn't need to be told twice. He practically leaped out of bed, grabbing his clothes and fumbling to put them on, his movements clumsy with haste and fear. Laura watched him, her face a mixture of terror and something else I couldn't quite decipher. I kept the camera focused on Ryan as he scrambled out of the bedroom, down the hallway, and out the front door, the sound of it slamming shut echoing through the suddenly silent house. I then turned my gaze to Laura, who was now sitting up in bed, the sheets clutched tightly to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Elliot, please. Let me explain," she pleaded, her voice choked with sobs. I simply looked at her, my face devoid of emotion. The calm I had maintained throughout the encounter felt like a fragile shield, threatening to shatter at any moment. I lowered my phone, the recording now stopped. "There's nothing to explain, Laura," I said, my voice flat and cold. "I think the recording speaks for itself." I turned and walked out of the bedroom, leaving Laura alone amidst the tangled sheets, her sobs filling the silence. The house felt different now, tainted, irrevocably changed in the space of a few horrifying minutes. I knew one thing for sure. My life would never be the same. The slam of the front door still echoed in my ears as I walked through the living room. The remnants of our life together suddenly felt foreign and hostile. Laura's favorite throw blanket lay crumpled on the sofa, a half-finished book rested on the coffee table, a silent testament to a life that had just fractured beyond repair. I couldn't bring myself to touch anything. The air felt thick with betrayal, and I needed to escape its suffocating grip. My first call was to my lawyer, Michael. His calm, reassuring voice on the other end of the line was a small anchor in the storm raging within me. I recounted the evening's events, the words tumbling out in a rush of anger and disbelief. Michael, as always, was pragmatic. He advised me to document everything, to avoid direct contact with Laura for the time being, and to focus on the kids. The kids. That thought hit me with the force of a physical blow. How would I tell them? How would I explain why their mother was suddenly gone? As I hung up with Michael, a sharp knock on the door startled me. I hesitated, peering through the peephole. It was a police officer, a woman in uniform. My heart sank. Had Laura already called? Was she trying to twist the story? I opened the door cautiously. "Mr. Davies?" she asked, her voice professional and direct. "Yes, that's me. I'm Sergeant Bennett. We need to ask you some questions regarding a call we received." Her gaze was steady, her expression neutral. My mind raced. What call? Had Ryan called? Had Laura concocted some story? I invited her in, my anxiety tightening its grip. Sergeant Bennett explained that they had received a call about a woman behaving erratically a couple of streets over, a woman matching Laura's description. Upon investigation, they had found her in possession of a controlled substance. My stomach dropped. Laura. Drugs. It was a side of her I had never seen, or perhaps I had chosen not to see. The next few hours were a blur of questions, paperwork, and a growing sense of shock. Sergeant Bennett was efficient and thorough, her questions direct but not accusatory. She asked about Laura's recent behavior, if I had noticed anything unusual. I recounted the late nights, the unexplained absences, the subtle shifts in her demeanor, things I had attributed to stress or work. Now, they took on a sinister new meaning. As Sergeant Bennett was leaving, she paused at the door. "Mr. Davies," she said, her gaze softening slightly. "This is a difficult situation. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out." She handed me her card. Her name was Claire Bennett. Over the next few days, the reality of my situation began to sink in. The house felt empty and silent without Laura's presence, yet at the same time, lighter, free from the underlying tension I hadn't even realized was there. My focus shifted entirely to my children, Lily and Noah. Telling them was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. I kept it simple, explaining that Mommy was going away for a while and that I would be taking care of them. They were confused and upset, but their resilience surprised me. They clung to me, and in turn, I clung to them. My lawyer, Michael, worked quickly. Given the circumstances and Laura's arrest, securing full custody of Lily and Noah was surprisingly straightforward. It felt like a hollow victory, a prize won at a devastating cost. A week after Laura left, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Hesitantly, I answered. "Mr. Davies? This is Claire Bennett." Her voice was warm, a stark contrast to the coldness I had been feeling. "I was just checking in, seeing how you and your children are doing." I was surprised by her call, but there was a genuine sincerity in her tone that I found myself drawn to. We talked for a while, not about the case, but about the kids, about the challenges of suddenly becoming a single parent. She offered some helpful advice, her words surprisingly comforting. Over the next few weeks, Claire called a few more times, always just checking in. Our conversations became less about the situation and more about everyday life. We discovered shared interests, a similar sense of humor. There was an undeniable connection forming between us, something unexpected and surprisingly comforting in the midst of my personal turmoil. One evening, after a particularly long and draining day with the kids, my phone rang, and it was Claire. "I was wondering," she said hesitantly, "if you'd be interested in grabbing a coffee sometime? Just as friends, of course." A flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope, perhaps, sparked within me. "I think I'd like that very much, Claire," I replied, a small smile finally gracing my lips. This was unexpected, a new path opening up when I thought all roads had been closed. But as I hung up the phone, a tiny seed of doubt began to sprout. Was I ready for this? Was it too soon? And what other surprises did life have in store for me? The coffee with Claire was nice, comforting, even. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing, a sense of ease settling between us that I hadn't felt in years. But as the weeks passed, a subtle distance began to creep in. Her calls became less frequent, her texts shorter. When I finally mustered the courage to ask her out again, she was evasive, citing work commitments and family obligations. The unspoken hung heavy in the air, a silent acknowledgement that whatever spark had ignited between us was now slowly fading. One cool spring evening, she called, her voice softer than usual. She explained vaguely that things were complicated, that she wasn't in a place for a serious relationship right now. Just like that, the unexpected ray of light in my darkness flickered and went out. The disappointment was sharp, a fresh wound on top of the old ones. I felt foolish for having let myself hope. The silence in the house after Claire's call felt heavier than ever. The kids were asleep, and I sat in the living room, the dim lamplight casting long shadows on the walls, the weight of loneliness pressing down on me. Just as I was about to head to bed, a hesitant knock echoed through the quiet house. I frowned, glancing at the clock. Nearly midnight. Who could be calling at this hour? I peered through the peephole. My breath hitched. It was Laura. She looked different. Thinner, her eyes shadowed with fatigue, her clothes rumpled and worn. She clutched a small, battered suitcase in her hand, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. What was she doing here? I hesitated for a long moment, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Anger, resentment, pity, confusion. I hadn't spoken to her since the night I found her with Ryan. Michael had advised against it, and I had followed his advice. But seeing her standing there, looking so vulnerable, stirred something within me, something I couldn't quite name. I opened the door a crack. Laura, what do you want? My voice was cold, unwelcoming. Her eyes welled up with tears. Elliot, please, can I come in? I have nowhere else to go. Her voice was barely a whisper, thick with emotion. Nowhere else to go. I repeated, skepticism lacing my tone. My family, she began, her voice trembling. They found out about everything. They kicked me out. They won't even speak to me. Her sobs racked her body, and she leaned against the doorframe, looking like she might collapse. A wave of reluctant pity washed over me. Regardless of what she had done, the thought of her being homeless, alone and desperate, was unsettling. What about Ryan? I asked, the name leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. She flinched. He's gone. He wasn't who I thought he was. As soon as things got difficult, he disappeared. Her voice was filled with a raw vulnerability that almost sounded genuine. I stood there, caught between my anger and a strange sense of responsibility. She had betrayed me in the worst possible way, but the woman standing before me looked broken, defeated. The thought of turning her away felt wrong. All right, Laura, I said, sighing heavily. You can come in. But this is not a reconciliation. This is just shelter. You stay in the guest room. No contact with me unless it's absolutely necessary. And no contact with the kids. Do you understand? She nodded quickly, tears still streaming down her face. Yes. Elliot. Thank you. Thank you so much. I opened the door wider, and she shuffled in, dragging her small suitcase behind her. The house felt even more crowded now, the air thick with unspoken accusations and unresolved pain. As I showed her to the guest room, the silence between us was deafening. Later, after she was settled, I sat in the living room, the events of the evening replaying in my mind. Claire was gone. Laura was back. My life had taken another unexpected and unwelcome turn. Was I doing the right thing? Was I being compassionate, or just naive? A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. This was going to be complicated. very complicated. And I had a sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. What was Laura really up to? And how would her presence affect the fragile stability I was trying to build for myself and my children? The night stretched before me, filled with unanswered questions and a growing sense of unease. The next few weeks were an exercise in carefully orchestrated awkwardness. Laura kept to the guest room, emerging only to help with household chores or to quietly prepare meals. She was subdued, almost meek, a stark contrast to the woman I had known. The kids, initially wary, slowly began to warm up to her, drawn by her gentle nature and willingness to play. I maintained a polite distance, the memory of her betrayal a constant, dull ache in my chest. Meanwhile, life at work had taken an unexpected turn for the better. My boss, Emily, had always been supportive, but lately, our interactions had become different. There were lingering glances, shared laughter that lasted a little too long, and a palpable energy that crackled between us during late-night work sessions. One evening, after we had finally wrapped up a particularly challenging project, she suggested we grab a drink. One drink turned into several, and the conversation flowed effortlessly, revealing a connection that went beyond spreadsheets and deadlines. Emily was smart, funny, and fiercely independent. Spending time with her was a breath of fresh air, a welcome distraction from the turmoil at home. Our relationship progressed quickly, fueled by a shared sense of vulnerability and a mutual appreciation for honesty. Before I knew it, I was falling for her. Introducing Emily to Lily and Noah was surprisingly easy. They adored her instantly, drawn to her warmth and playful spirit. Seeing them happy, seeing myself finding a semblance of normalcy again, felt like a miracle. A few months later, standing in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by close friends and family, Emily and I exchanged vows. It felt right, a new chapter beginning, leaving the pain of the past behind. But life, I was learning, had a funny way of throwing curveballs. A few weeks after the wedding, I received a message from an unexpected number. It was Claire. She was back in town and wondered if I'd be open to meeting up. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. Curiosity, apprehension, a lingering fondness. I told Emily about it, and to my surprise, she was understanding, even encouraging. "You need closure, Elliot," she said, her eyes full of empathy. Meeting Claire again felt strange, like stepping back into a half-forgotten dream. We talked for hours, catching up on each other's lives. She explained that her previous reluctance had stemmed from personal issues she had since resolved. There was still a spark between us, a comfortable familiarity that time hadn't completely erased. Then, things took an even more unexpected turn. One evening, Emily, Claire, and I were having dinner at our place. Laura, as usual, kept to herself in the guest room. But as the evening wore on, Emily suggested we invite her to join us. It was awkward at first, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. But Emily, with her natural warmth and inclusive nature, managed to break the ice. To my surprise, Laura and Claire seemed to find common ground, bonding over shared experiences and a surprising amount of mutual respect. Over the next few weeks, this unlikely camaraderie blossomed. Emily, ever open-minded, suggested we explore the possibility of a different kind of relationship, one that acknowledged the complex history and the unexpected connections that had formed between the four of us. The idea was radical, unconventional. It challenged everything I thought I knew about relationships and family. But as I looked at Emily, her eyes shining with genuine curiosity and a desire for a different kind of happiness, and then at Claire, her smile tentative but hopeful, and even at Laura, who seemed to have found a sense of belonging she hadn't had in a long time, I started to consider it. The conversations that followed were long, honest, and often uncomfortable. We talked about boundaries, expectations, and the potential challenges of such an arrangement. It wasn't easy, but there was a genuine desire from all of us to make it work. And so, slowly, tentatively, we began to navigate this new, uncharted territory. Our household evolved into something I never could have imagined. Me, my wife Emily, my former romantic interest Claire, and Laura. It was strange, complex, and undeniably unconventional. But as I watched my children laughing in the living room, surrounded by the 4 adults who loved them in their own unique ways, a sense of peace settled over me. Maybe, just maybe, this unconventional family could actually work. But the journey had just begun, and I knew there would be more surprises and challenges ahead. Navigating a 4-person relationship was an education. There were calendar apps filled with color-coded schedules, late-night talks about feelings, and a constant renegotiation of boundaries. It was messy, complicated, and at times, utterly bewildering. Yet, beneath the surface of the unconventional arrangement, a strange sort of harmony began to emerge. Emily's pragmatic nature kept us grounded, Claire's easygoing attitude smoothed over conflicts, and Laura, surprisingly, became a quiet anchor, her remorse and desire for redemption palpable. Despite the unexpected peace, I still carried a weight of unresolved emotions, a lingering sense of the initial betrayal. Emily, perceptive as always, suggested I talk to someone, a professional. I was hesitant at first, but the idea of having an objective perspective, a safe space to unpack the years of emotional baggage, eventually won me over. I found Sophia. Her office at Clearview Counseling was a calming oasis, filled with soft light and the gentle scent of lavender. From the first session, I felt a sense of ease with her, a feeling that I could finally speak openly and honestly without judgment. We talked about everything: the initial shock of Laura's infidelity, the fleeting hope with Claire, the unexpected love with Emily, and the even more unexpected evolution of our family. Sophia listened patiently, offering insightful observations and guiding me towards a better understanding of my own emotions and the dynamics of our unique situation. Over the months, I found myself looking forward to our sessions, finding clarity and a sense of peace I hadn't thought possible. Then, one afternoon, during a particularly vulnerable session, Sophia shared something personal. She spoke about her own past relationships, her own journey of finding happiness outside of traditional norms. There was a connection in her vulnerability, a shared understanding that went beyond the typical therapist-patient dynamic. Over the next few weeks, that connection deepened. Our conversations became less about my past and more about our shared present, our perspectives aligning in surprising ways. I found myself drawn to her intelligence, her empathy, and her quiet strength. And, to my surprise, I sensed a similar attraction from her. It was Emily who first voiced the unspoken. One evening, as the 4 of us were relaxing in the living room, she looked at me, a knowing smile in her eyes. "You've been so much happier since you started seeing Sophia," she said. "We all have." She then looked at Claire and Laura, who nodded in agreement. Maybe she's meant to be part of our family too." The suggestion hung in the air, both shocking and strangely logical. It felt like the ultimate step into the unknown, a complete surrender to the unconventional path our lives had taken. We talked about it, all of us, long into the night. There were hesitations, uncertainties, but also an underlying sense of rightness, a feeling that this could be another step towards a deeper, more complete happiness. And so, Sophia joined our unconventional family. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic shift, but a gradual integration, a natural extension of the bonds that had already formed. Our home became even more vibrant, filled with a complex tapestry of love, friendship, and shared experiences. Life wasn't always easy. There were still challenges, moments of jealousy, and the occasional raised eyebrow from the outside world. But we had learned to communicate openly, to support each other through thick and thin, and to find joy in the unique connections we shared. Looking back, I never would have imagined my life taking this turn. The pain of Laura's betrayal had initially felt like the end of everything. But it had also been the catalyst for a series of unexpected events that had led me to a place I never thought possible, a place of unconventional, yet profound, happiness. My family wasn't traditional, it wasn't what society expected, but it was ours. It was built on honesty, acceptance, and a love that had evolved and expanded in ways I could never have predicted. And in the quiet moments, watching my children surrounded by the 4 women who loved them, I knew that despite the initial heartbreak, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Our story was a testament to the fact that happiness can be found in the most unexpected of places, and that sometimes the most broken paths lead to the most beautiful destinations.